on. You can keep track. It's a fun game. Can I get a quick show of hands? Who has done a game jam before? Anywhere, any type of game jam. Who has done a game jam here at the Science Center before? And who has never done a game jam before this moment? Ooh, that's awesome. It's going to be wonderful. We've got a great plan for you all for how we're going to get started this evening, and we're hoping some really cool things are going to get set. So the plan for the moment is that we are going to talk about what is a game jam for all those second people who raise their hands, and this may be the first game jam. We're going to talk a little bit about what the framework for that is. We are going to talk a little bit about logistics, so things that you should know while you are here doing this game jam. We're going to get a little bit of inspiration from the mentors about all the cool things you can be jamming about. And then those are all the things that are going to happen in this space. Then we are going to head back on over to Ackerley, where we will create our ideas and we will jam. So with that in mind, Andrew, do you want to come on up and talk about game jamming?
Hello, how are you guys doing? I'm but one of many people who will be coming up here to talk with you today. The other people who will be coming up are far more qualified. They've done research and have things to inspire you with. I'm just here to talk to you about game jams, and particularly 48-hour game jams. 48-hour game jams, so much time. We have so much time. We have so much time to make games. We'll have infinite time. We'll be done before the game jam's even over. The game jam will start tonight. We have Friday evening. That's tonight. We'll do a lot of brainstorming. On Saturday, we'll be working on our game. And on Sunday, we'll have most of Sunday. We'll be finishing off around 6 on Sunday. So tonight, all of Saturday, most of Sunday. So much time. We'll form a team tonight. We'll make the game on Saturday. We'll share the game on Sunday. I don't know, profit. It'll be great. Nothing will go wrong. We'll have infinite time. 40 hours. Fantastic. Except I'm forgetting something. Sleeping is a thing that some people do sometimes. I like to do it occasionally on a daily basis. Sleeping is very important. A lot of people think that because this is a hackathon, I have to go constantly all the time and I have to just like sprint full time because that's how people do marathons, right? But I think people who believe that definition don't know what marathons are. And marathons are not sprints. You pace yourself. You don't run constantly the entire time. And if you do, I'm worried for you. You take your time, you pace yourself, and especially for 48 hours, you should sleep and take care of yourself. Otherwise, you will burn out. And that's a thing we're seeing more and more in our industry, especially with articles about crunch and overtime and all sorts of things. So please pace yourself. We're going to add some time here to our timeline for sleep. I don't know how much sleep. I'm not your mom, your call. But this lowers us to about 32 hours. So 32 hours, still a good chunk of time. We got tonight, we got most of Saturday, we got most of Sunday, and we should be good. We can make a game. Nothing will go wrong until it does, because bugs happen. That's the thing. Who here can write perfect code? Don't raise your hand. Don't at me. I see you. Everything will go wrong, and we want to account for that. If we're generous, maybe 4 hours of bug fixing, maybe 6, maybe 8, maybe all of Sunday if we're lucky. These are some of the bugs I've had. If you're working with a team of other people, things go wrong when you work with other people. My artist made this beautiful shader, and it looks great. And we integrated it right at the end of the jam, and we had to ship it that way. This is my merge conflict. I merged my code with my fellow programmer, and he was spawning enemies, and I spawned too many enemies. All those red boxes are different enemies. You will have time for bugs, and you will need to account for it. There will be time on the timeline, specifically for those bad things that happen. So I'm going to add some time here on Sunday for bugs, and also, you have to upload your game at the end. Everyone will be uploading the game all at once. You have to make a profile picture. You gotta write some words by yourself, take a picture of your team. There's gonna be some time for that at the end. So maybe 24 hours, if we're lucky. 24 hours, 24 hours. We're gonna rebrand this game jam from a 40-hour game jam. This is now a 24-hour game jam. Please fix it in your head. It's not a 40-hour game jam, it's 24, but over 3 days, which is actually kind of nice. You get some time to sleep, ruminate on your ideas, you get some time to fix things with your team, but it is, however, not a lot of time. So when you're planning your game, do think of these things. What should I do with my 24 hours? Keep your game real small. You only have 24 hours. Keep it to it, like you have your idea, make it simpler, and then too simple. You're like, that's too simple. That should be too easy. That's good, because it won't be. Other things you can do is have something playable by the end of Saturday night, because you're gonna have a game that's playable, and then you can spend all Sunday just fixing bugs and making it better and polishing it. It won't be fully done Saturday night, but it'll be playable. If you have something you can share, then you're halfway there. Other people can play it. It may not have a tutorial, it may not have no polish, the art might be all the black boxes you saw, but good enough. The last thing you can do is don't be afraid of mistakes. It might be here, it might be your first game jam, you might be thinking, hey, everything's going wrong, and that's good. Now is the time to do it. You're surrounded by other people also making mistakes, and we can all make mistakes together. Don't be afraid of it, embrace it. The other thing you should do is meet people, make games, change the world, have fun, and I don't know, profit. We will see you at the end of the jam. I'm going to pass this back to the staff.
So there's a lot of people who have helped make this jam possible. This is just a couple of the people that you'll see throughout this weekend that you'll be able to ask questions of and figure out things about what's going on with the jam, what's going on with the topic, and all those fun things. So I'm one of those. I'm on the left. I work over here at the Pacific Science Center. You've got Tim from Seattle Indies if you want to stand up and wave at everyone. And if you got Sarah Jo from UW if you want to stand up and wave at everyone. There are other people who I did not put on the slide because they didn't send me their headshots. So Sonia's probably somewhere. If you want to stand up and wave at people, she can also answer lots of Game Jam related questions for you all. There are also mentors at this jam. You'll hear more about them, but they have that cool question mark button in the middle. Or if they don't yet, they will, because they just heard about them just now.
Those are our Discord names on there as well.
Oh, awesome. Also, in a second, we're going to tell you about Discord, which is a way for us all to be able to communicate digitally throughout the weekend. We are on Discord. I'm myself, Tim's Tim C, and Sarah Jo is also Sarah Jo. A couple of things to know, be courteous to your fellow jammers and guests. So we are going to be open to the public for the Science Center tomorrow, starting at 8 a.m. and running until 6, and on Sunday, starting at 10 a.m. and going until 6, meaning that while you're making your cool games, there's going to be other people around. Be nice to people. Sleeping is really important, as Andrew mentioned, so we are going to be closing the site at midnight each night, and then reopening at 8 a.m. So you can go home, you can get your all your rest, and then you can come on back ready to make cool things. And then we also have, just like I mentioned, our Discord. That QR code in the corner goes to the Discord channel, and because I knew everyone was going to be like, whoa, I should be a part of that at this moment, but that doesn't mean you pulled out your phone fast enough. But I was going to change slides anyway. I left it there. Genius. This is the plan for the event, right? So at the moment, we are doing our kickoff. In a little bit, we're going to do idea formation. And then idea sharing, we're going to jam, and at midnight everyone's going to go home. On Saturday, you all can come back right at 8 a.m. From 8 to 6, open to the public. We're hoping that there'll be a kind of hour dedicated to playtesting, because you will have made, just like Andrew mentioned, a playtestable game by Saturday afternoon or by Saturday evening. So at 7, you can show off your game to other people, and we'll get you more details about that. Sunday, coming back at 8 a.m., we're open to the public from 10 to 6. 4 p.m., you should stop jamming and start uploading. We know that says 2 hours there, but really that's because you're all going to go, but wait, what about this thing? What about that thing? So we give you 2 hours to actually get uploaded, and also because the internet. And then we're going to be back in this space from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. on Sunday night to show off all your games. Your games will be on a square like this big in the middle of the screen, and you will have your computer up here, and we have every dongle you could ever need to connect your computer to this thing. Some other things you need to know, just logistic-wise. So access to the buildings is available from 8 a.m. to midnight. You can use the blue door that you entered through from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. And then from 11 a.m. to midnight, just go through our north entrance, the one that goes all the way to Seattle Center. Does this have a laser pointer? It does, but you can't really see it. Yeah, there. Go through that one. And then we are going to be jamming over in the space over there. What's also important to know is that you cannot smoke on Pacific Science Center's campus. You have to go out into Seattle Center or out onto the street if you want to smoke. So you can leave through the north entrance or through the blue door, and then you come on back. And then once again, I moved the Discord thing this time, but hopefully you all have it at this point, because it's a very useful link to have. We've got a couple journalists who are here. You're going to be documenting what we're doing and doing a little bit of a write-up afterwards about all the cool things we're doing. Can you all stand up and raise your hands and wave around if you were here? So if you see them throughout the weekend, answer their questions. You'll be highlighted, you'll be featured, it'll be awesome. And with that in mind, we are going to have some folks come get people excited about the topic. And so the general idea is that we are going to have a bunch of different researchers, some talking about environment and climate change related themes, some talking about game related themes, come and share their research, get you all excited about the different dimensions of games you could be making. But one thing you should be thinking about is which specifically on the environment and climate change related researchers and mentors, which things really excite you, and do you think you might want to end up making a game around in some way, inspired by their research, showing off their research, inspired by their topic in some way, because the next thing we're going to be doing is based off of what they're going to be telling you all now. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand it over to Dargan to take it away.
Can you mention the food? Can you mention food after this?
Oh, also, while we do the idea formation stuff, we will feed you. So there will be food. And?
So for the submissions, you said uploading the game, but if you're making a board game, what is the process?
We'll figure that out.
So the question was, if you are not making a digital game, you're making a board game or a physical game, what is the process for uploading it? And the answer is, we will get back to you because there will be a way to do it, but I don't know yet.
Usually you just have to upload like a PDF of the rules and a picture or something.
All right. Yeah, I'm Dargan. I am a professor at UW. I think there's something wrong here. These don't look like my slides, but I'm going to kind of roll with it. All right, let's see what's going on. In fact, actually, the date looks strange. Anyway, I'm a climate scientist. I'm going to give you kind of the standard gloom and doom about why you should care about climate science. All right. So we'll roll with this. This looks almost like my slides, so hopefully. Okay. An introduction from the future. Okay, so this was signed. I sent this PowerPoint from the year 2049. Okay. I hope if we still use PowerPoint in 2049, I don't want to be a part of the future, I don't think. But okay. Oh, everyone here uses the font Futura. Okay. Oh, just kidding. Very funny. That actually sounds like a joke I'd make. Back to Trebuchet there, I guess. Yeah. You're living an amazing time to be alive. That's not what I would call it. But okay. All right. Sure. The 2020s are a decade of real transformation, both in terms of where we get our energy and a whole lot more. Okay. That would be good. We have a lot to do right now in terms of solving the climate problem, for sure. How did we get here? Okay, I'm just reading. People had finally internalized the fact that we have to completely stop burning fossil fuels to solve the climate crisis. Well, I can tell you scientifically that's true. We have to completely stop burning in order for emission. You can think of it kind of like a balloon, right? You blow in to the balloon, you got to stop blowing completely for the balloon not to keep filling up. We also have to change, that's massive changes to society, right, to do that. And recognized how many people's lives would be affected by the transition. That's true too, right? I mean, fossil fuels are so much of a part of our life right now. This is a large part of why we've had so much trouble solving it. Indeed, the Green New Deal proposal was a key turning point. It proposed solutions on the scale of the crises we faced and focused on building a society that worked for everyone. How many of y'all know the Green New Deal? Yeah, good. A lot of y'all. This is sort of like one of the main inspirations behind this jam. It is indeed looking at the scale of the crisis, right? It recognizes that you have to completely stop burning fossil fuels in order to solve the problem. Some of the older climate legislation, right, like the Kyoto Protocol and stuff, were kind of supposed to be just incremental changes on the way to completely stopping fossil fuels, right? And that even wasn't that successful, arguably, right? But this has the vision, and also that's true, right? Future that works for everybody. To see proposals like that implemented all over the world was amazing. Wow, that would be great if that happened, right? And actually, that brings up that just the American Green New Deal plan has been taken on in other countries, like Spain wants to do their own Green New Deal now, right? Has a new government that's pushing for it, right? England is talking about it. There are tens of thousands of people actually every Friday protesting about climate change and in school strikes, right? All across Europe, and a few in the United States as well. Things were tough. Okay, this is the stuff that I'm confident with talking about as a scientist. Hurricanes, droughts, fires, floods, they got a lot worse. Well, yeah, that's true too. Even if we did solve this problem, climate change is not an easy issue because, we're gonna continue to warm even after completely emitting fossil fuels. It's not like you plug up the smokestack and pollution gets better immediately, right? Okay. But we listened to frontline and vulnerable communities for what they needed to flourish. This is a key part of the Green New Deal as well. It's about saving the world for everybody, right? Not just a few billionaires, basically, you know? Sounds good. We had to make a lot of tough choices, but we did it together. Interesting. We built a safety net to help support each other through hard times. This is a fundamental part of the Green New Deal, right? They're talking about mobilizing the resources of the entire country to fight climate change, right? So they say in order to do that, then you need things like childcare for everybody, right? So you can have more people in the workforce, right? That you need Medicare for all, because if you're going to be moving around the country to go to a new job, then you need security with healthcare, right? And in a way, you've gotten to this future that's kind of better for everybody, right? It's solving a lot of problems at once, potentially. Importance of communication, okay. Let me tell you, the 2040s are awesome, huh? Everybody likes banjo? Really? I play the banjo? No way. Oh, just kidding. Shoot. Okay. What people really need in your time is a clear vision of a fossil fuel-free society and how to get there, how the future will be better. Oh, okay. It took a lot of creative minds to envision the future, and everyone's voice mattered. There was one key work of art that was so inspiring. It actually helped us to build a better world. It involved visual art programming, music. Well, I think you'll see soon. Interesting. Wow. Thanks from 2049. All right. That's enough for me, I think. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Teresa Horstman. I am an affiliate research assistant professor at UW-Bothell at the School of Educational Studies and Learning Sciences, but I am more recently a usability researcher at Microsoft. I'm here to talk to you about some design ideas that center around learning. The first game for learning that I designed was in 98, 99, and it was a complete failure. So much so that I am still drawing from that experience now. I followed that thinking for the last 3 decades, and I tried to summarize that in the next 6 slides. So I've either not learned very much or I'm really good at summarizing. So we'll see how this goes. One of the difficult things in working in interdisciplinary design teams is you have to develop a shared understanding of the terms and phrases that you're using. One of those, like learning, is on the surface super easy to understand. We all have an understanding of what that means. But when you drill down to the specifics, we all have very different experiences with it. This graphic was made at UW-Seattle, and it represents, the orange bits represent time we are in school learning, and the blue bits, or the blue space, represents learning all the other times. So really, learning is happening all the time. So for us, what that means is educational games aren't necessarily restricted to school time, but more importantly, learning from games aren't restricted to educational games. So you can expand the design of your game in any capacity. So to support this thinking, there's a theory, of course. There's a few, but I am only going to do one. How many of you have heard sociocultural learning theory? Okay, this is the one jargon. Did I get the jargon sign? Okay. I was hoping for the jargon sign. There it is. Awesome. In short, learning is just not in your head, that it's socially situated. There's context that surrounds how we learn. And what I like about this picture is it just demonstrates some of the dimensions of learning. There's social interactions, there's tools and materials that are being used, how those tools and materials are being introduced to you, or taught to you impacts learning. There's the physical configuration of the space, as well as the virtual configuration of the space. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. There's also, there's histories and identities that are brought into the space as well, of the social interactions. So with a better understanding, or shared understanding what learning is, and the theory that backs it up, let's look at a way to design for that kind of learning. I hope you all recognize this quote. And I don't want to diminish the complexity of game design or the different ways of thinking about game design, but I latched onto this quote because it also applies to learning. Designing learning doesn't have to be a prescriptive task. So in other words, you do not have to include a test or a quiz in your game. It can be embedded in the action. So now that we've freed up what learning can be in games, I'm going to ask you to consider one element in your design. Oh, I got the other jargon side, I forgot. But I want you to consider when you're building your games to build in an opportunity for your players to think about how they think, to reflect on their play, to reflect on how they're making sense of it, and to honestly reflect on how they feel, and give them space to do that. That's the only parameter I have for you. I don't know if, oh, you can't really see it, but that's an ADI. This is a screenshot from Hated by the Nation, one of the episodes in Black Mirror series. And the reason why I like this episode, but that series in particular, is Brooker prompts us to consider how we operate within systems. And like climate change, it's a complex system. The systems that climate change intersects with, the social systems, political, educational policy, social media, social justice, cannot be separated from climate science education. And so considering the complexity and the hugeness of this problem, I don't want it to be intimidating, but I want to encourage you to just go all in. There's so many dimensions to this that you can latch onto. So in keeping with the keep it simple, there are still margins that you can find yourself in, but it is much, much, much bigger. So thank you, last thing. Thank you for being here and being part of this community, and for using your superpowers of creativity and intellect to help think about how to solve this problem. All right.
Hello, my name is Isabel. I come from Mexico, so tend to be a little bit louder. I have a PhD in environmental sciences, although I work for the College of the Environment at UW, doing diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I wear many hats. Today I'm going to talk a little bit, or tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about what I did for my dissertation, and it's looking at food and climate change. And how many of you, every time you go and prepare your dinner, think that what is on your plate contributes more than your car to climate change? So I know that here in Seattle, we are more into this thing, so you are going to get my ideas, hopefully easily. But I come from Mexico, and you know, the first way we connect to nature and to family and to community is food. So that's why I was attracted to study food. And food and climate change is really interesting, because if you think about food systems, this is since we prepare, since the seed, whatever has the processes for harvesting, processes for preparing, that means also cooking, and packing or even storing your seeds or your food, all that constitutes a food system. And if you will look all the pieces involved into this food system, you will realize that food systems are actually one of the problems, the most important problems towards climate change. I'm not going to give you all these numbers, but just to give you an idea. Because of production of food, we have deforested, that means cut a lot of trees all around the world. And biodiversity, this is all animals, plants, fungi, everything that has life is going down. Actually, insects, I don't know if anyone heard what the past UN report said. Insects are in decline, almost 75%. But if you would add that a fourth of what is considered production of food contributes to climate change, and specifically with this emission of greenhouse gases, which, yep, yes, which will be all these gases that contribute to go into the ozone and contribute to make the planet feel hotter, right? And these changes and patterns. And what it's even worse is that 1/3 of our food goes to waste. 1/3 not even got to your table. And the rest of the third, depending on where do you live, in the global north or the global south, the quality of food you're getting, right? So what I was interested in my PhD is especially looking into the social components of the food systems. I come from Mexico, and I lived for a couple of years in Chiapas, which is South Mexico, and lived with indigenous communities who had to rely on producing their own food. But to be honest, what they will make selling their food was nothing. So these disparities between producing, if you go to Yakima, for example, and see the farm workers, many of them, Mexicans are from South America, South and Central America, how they live, they are exposed to pesticides and all kind of these chemicals, because since the Green Revolution, that is since the 40s, when we started using a lot of fossil fuels to produce our pesticides and all the things to make more food in a faster way. Since then, all these pollution coming into our food systems is also absorbed by the people who work these food systems, and who, by the way, are the most food insecure, at least in the United States. So food is a way to go into this new just transition. If we think on who is producing the food, who has access to food, how we are producing our food, when I open a can, where it comes from. If we are a little bit more mindful of our food, then we can think about how to change the system. And just to finish, I want to introduce you to something that is agroecology. Ecology means all these systems in environment. Agroecology looks into the systems in all the components in a food system, including human. And actually what we want is to have a more sustainable, and by sustainable I mean not just environmentally, but also socially just food system. So just to leave you with some ideas, consider that by 2050, there will be almost 10 billion people in this planet, and 80% of these people will be living in cities. That means land conversion, less forest, less food production. Who is going to produce our food, and what are we going to eat? Thank you.
Hey, my name is Sarah Chase. I'm a PhD student at UW, and I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the research that I'm focusing on. Calls to reconnect with nature are everywhere. They're in our academic discourse or conversations. They're in the newspapers. Parents are told to connect their kids with nature. And if you're like me, I look at that and wonder, what does that mean? What does it look like to connect with nature? Oftentimes we think about being disconnected from nature as being the root cause of a lot of today's environmental crises, including climate change. In Western societies, in Europe and in America, we're increasingly disconnected, both physically, we're moving to cities where there are less natural elements, but also psychologically, where we're seeing humans as being separate from nature, not only apart, but above nature. So for me and a group of researchers, nature connectedness means an increasing recognition of the similarity between ourselves and nature. It means feeling this sense of kinship, of family with the natural world, and of thinking of ourselves as egalitarian members of a broader natural community rather than being at the top of some hierarchy where humans dominate the natural landscape. And this matters for addressing climate change. Climate change is often seen as remote, is seen as abstract, and is of not being that relevant to our daily lives. But research shows us that when we perceive someone or something as being similar to ourselves, we're not only more likely to respond empathetically, but we're also more likely to take action to protect that entity or to act on their behalf. And the research bears it out. Pro-environmental behaviors of a bunch of different kinds, increased empathy for nature, the willingness to sacrifice and do the hard things that it means to protect nature, and even a belief in climate change have all been associated with higher levels of nature connectedness. So if we can increase the way that we feel and think about a relationship with nature as being similar to ourselves, we can not only increase the personal relevance that climate change has for us, but also increase the likelihood of taking action that we know we need to address climate change. So what does that mean? How do we reconnect with nature? Thankfully, research gives us a couple key tools. One is just spending time in nature, whether that's gardening or hiking or bird watching, activities that can engage us with a sensory awareness, not just visually, but the sense of smell, the sound of the birds chirping, increase our sense of oneness with the natural world. Also activities that offer us the opportunity to draw our attention to and reflect on the physical aspects of the natural world that we find particularly beautiful, whether that's that view of Rainier on the ferry ride home or a particularly stunning sunset. Also the use of meaning and symbolism that exists within nature, and this is all over within our language. So thinking about what Mother Nature or the web of life means, pondering on the meaning of the first flowers in spring. These can connect us to the natural world. And also invoking pre-existing and emerging bonds with the natural world, whether that's gratitude, love for nature. If we can invoke them and remind folks, that will increase nature connectedness. We also know a little bit about what doesn't work. Providing information, quizzing folks, teaching identification skills, those are important things, but in and of themselves, they don't connect us to nature. Knowing a species name may not necessarily mean we care about it. So it's an important thing, but it's insufficient to create nature connectedness. So over the course of this weekend, I want to challenge you to think about what does a strong emotional connectedness look like for us in the 21st century? How can we connect to nature in a world that is increasingly urban, it's increasingly mediated by technology, and quite frankly, replicating the experiences of previous generations is probably not going to work in today's society. So how can you incorporate some strategies that foster a deepened sense of nature connectedness in the games that you're creating, envisioning the future? Thank you. We've got some loading, the internet.
I could go without the title slide, if that's helpful.
Well, why don't I do that, and then you can just hit present after this, because it loads there. Just
Oh, cool. Perfect.
Just hit present after you get to that.
Wonderful. Hi, everybody. My name is Rick Thomas, and I'm also a graduate student at UW. However, because my current research isn't strictly focused on climate, I thought I'd share with you actually some contracting work that I've been doing that I think is a little more relevant to the jamming you guys are going to be doing in the next few days.
And then
Perfect. So what I do is I design exhibits and games that educate and connect people to the natural environment. And these tend to take the form of outdoor escape rooms. Just a quick show of hands, who's done an escape room? All right, yeah. So for people who haven't done one or haven't heard of them, this is when you and all your friends will get locked in a room for an hour and you have to solve puzzles and crack codes to try and find the key and escape. And so what I do is I take, sort of those topics, move it outdoors, make it family friendly. So while kids and their parents aren't necessarily trying to escape, they have an environmental mission they're trying to complete. And because I'm very interested in the impact these games have, as part of my master's thesis, I did some assessments and found that these games not only after playing them, families are not only more willing to spend time outdoors together, but have a greater connectedness to nature. And whenever I talk to people about, if they're thinking of designing a game that educates or connects people to an environmental topic, I advise them that the game have these 4 criteria. So, nothing groundbreaking by any means, but something that is interesting is that after debuting these games for families across the country, I found that out of all these elements, the one that is most important to fostering this connectedness to the environment is actually the ability to work together as a team in doing so. So sharing the excitement as you're playing, as well as having people to chat with after the fact. And this is something that's actually strongly lacking in climate action today. As you can imagine from what you've been hearing so far already, that's very problematic. So if we're going to be solving climate change without drastic consequences, we need to be working together. And we see, glimpses of that with, international or regional, I'll ahead myself a little bit. International or regional efforts, our day-to-day lives, the narrative is much more about sort of what should I be doing? What do I need to give up? And it's sort of hard to see here, but I kind of picture it a little bit like the kids you see here on the left, where a bunch of us may be working on the same puzzles, whether that's helping solve climate change or in this escape room, they're fixing a broken water supply. We all might be working on it, but often we're not raising our heads to see who else is working on it or what impact we could be having collectively. And if you're anything like me, trying to work on something individually like climate change is not only overwhelming, but a little disincentivizing, right? So what I was thinking about is, what if there's a way you could change it where you have a team of your close friends and family, and suddenly you guys are working together to fix the water supply or reduce your carbon footprint. Think of how suddenly it's about what can we be doing collectively, what impact could we have together. And I've witnessed firsthand the excitement and success that comes about when you give a team an environmental goal. And I strongly think that's what the climate action movement needs today. Fortunately, this is where I think games, and specifically your games, can help with this. And I invite everyone here today to think about ways that you can sort of bake in collaboration into climate action. So what I want to do, okay, so I wasn't sure if you showed up. I think that got slightly swapped in the transition, but you get the sense there, hopefully. So what I want to do is leave you with some guidelines that I think about when I'm designing collaboration within my escape rooms. And I would argue that these guidelines work not only for your game design, but also for climate action as a whole. Perfect. Okay, well, there's a slide up there. It's all, or unless I can pop it up here. Cool, you see them all at once. So a successful collaborative activity will be one where participants are able to uniquely contribute based on their skills or interests. And sort of the second one, it's important that whatever these contributions are that people want to do, it's important that you're given milestones or checkpoints along the way. Let them feel encouraged of what they're doing, as well as make sure that they're on the right path. Anytime you can design an activity or game where it's actually easier with more people, or perhaps impossible with fewer, you're obviously going to make collaboration a much more bigger component to it. And then last but certainly not least, having something that you guys are all excited to be working at together, makes a huge difference. So with that, I'd thank you, and yeah, thank you for your time.
everybody. My name is Jason Lombacher. I'm an environmental political theorist at the University of Washington, Bothell, and I did my PhD work on the University of Washington Seattle campus in political science. So I'm here to encourage you to use your superpowers this weekend to think globally and to also think politically and also ethically. Climate change raises many questions and many political problems, as I will talk about in just a moment, but I think there's also a tremendous grounds for optimism about it being a political opportunity. The title of my talk here is Strengthening the Paris Climate Accord, and that's kind of what I want to focus on for this talk. So late last year, some of you may be aware of this, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change came out with a very important report. And it came out with some very interesting details about the differences in impacts in terms of extreme weather, species, water availability, heat events, and so on, and differences between a 2-degree warming world and a 1.5 degrees. And the detail was really remarkable. And this is important because in the sort of haphazard way in which we've gone through the Kyoto process, the beginning of the global climate change process since 1992 in various iterations through Kyoto in 1997 and accelerations through the Paris process in 2015. We were sort of looking at the 2-degree mark, but now the consensus really seems to be that we really need to be aiming for 1.5 degrees or less in order to really try to mitigate some of these significant problems. So I'm going to give you some, if you take a look at the slides here, this is an example of an ecological footprint map, and this comes from the Global Footprint Network. And if you're interested in doing some gaming stuff around this weekend, you can take a look at this map and click on all these countries here, and it gives you lots of information about ecological deficits and ecological reserves. I think one of the things you see when you look at this map here is that some countries are exceeding their limits while other countries are not. And so thinking about this as a political question also raises really important questions about justice and about equity. And if we're going to think about global collective action, to really further strengthen the Paris Climate Accords, Paris Climate Accords on steroids, I would hope for, we really need to address questions of equity. So there's a map that gives you some good information about that. So the Paris Climate Accord is the first time ever that all countries that have signed up for it, 195 countries have signed, and at this point in time, in 2019, 185 countries are party to it. So that's a really significant portion of the world's population. And it's the first time in history that all countries have agreed to put together national action plans to do something about climate change. So it was mentioned earlier about the Green New Deal, and it would be great if all countries in the world implemented the Green New Deal in terms of their national action plans. But this was significant, and it's significant for a number of reasons. One, it was the first time all countries are going to formally sign up to a process where they're going to, every 5 years, give transparent plans about what they're doing. And the idea is that this will ramp up over time. And that transparency aspect of it is also really important because countries get a chance to see what other countries are doing, right? And so it's not just an isolated thing. And the idea is here, this is the classic political science problem of a collective action problem. How many of you have done group work where you or a few members of your group are really doing most of the work, and others are kind of free riding along? Probably a lot of you, right? So this is an idea, this is a problem that's inherent in collective action. And so the idea here is in addressing questions of equity, addressing questions of justice, we can get more people on board and countries on board to do things together. And so what I want you to think about for the games here is to think about how could we potentially design an interactive game using these national action plans that would correlate with a 1.5 degree world. You see this global greenhouse emissions here. If we do nothing by the year 2100, we're headed towards 4.5 degrees. the current national action plans, this was a couple of years ago, so we can check the numbers on this. We're headed for 3.5 degrees. So the national action plans as they exist are woefully inadequate. And so you see that the 2-degree pathway, we still need to go far, far below that. So I want you to think about, in terms of this game, got a couple slides here about principles of justice and equity. You can take a look at that. But how would, which countries would have to make major changes to their climate impact? The United States, for instance, has 5% of the world's population, but produces 20% of the world's emissions. You know, so that's something we need to confront squarely. So what kind of game could we think about that would illustrate a global collective action plan and a new and robust version of the Paris Climate Accords? I'll give you a few sources here at the end here that you can take a look at too. So, thank you.
Great. I have no slides. I'm slideless, which makes me either woefully unprepared, entirely possible, or cannily contrarian in some ways, or just not willing to compete with Dargan because I knew his slides were going to be really cool. So anyway, you can take your pick of any of those. What am I? I am not a climate scientist. I am not a game designer or programmer. Do not come to me with those questions. I am a humanist. A humanist. Edward Abbey defined a humanist as somebody who'd rather kill a human being than a snake. So anyway, that's a certain way of caring about nature too. I'm at the University of Washington. I'm a literature person. I am actually, and I didn't know there was a jargon slide, so I really want to go for this. I'm a narratologist. What does this mean? This means that they pay me to study stories and to look at them, it's metacognitively, right? Which is to have people actually think about the stories that they do, right? Or that they experience. Stories are fundamental. Stories make us who we are. And they're not easy. There's a big difference between what makes a good story and a bad story, and that's not really easy to figure out, but that's something you need to be thinking about this weekend from the very beginning. For instance, what makes a good story? Well, a story that lasts for a long time is a good story, right? Good story. Robinson Crusoe. How many of you know the Robinson Crusoe story? Robinson Crusoe story. Oh, come on, the Robinson Crusoe story. Okay, who can give me a 10-word version of that? And can't stop there. He doesn't die, right? I would live for 30 seconds on a desert island, right? You know, so this would be a short story. Those are stories too, right? You know the story, right? How many of you have read Robinson Crusoe? 1, 2, 3, wow, what, 4, 5, 6, 7, wow, God, you were in my class? Anyway, but, you know, Robinson Crusoe was published in 1719. That's a story that has lasted for a really, really long time because it's a powerful story. It's a story that's become a myth, right? You cannot turn on the television and watch TV or look at reality shows without seeing one or another version of Robinson Crusoe there, right? That's a story that really has worked, and it's thinking about why. What is that speaking to, right? What is that actually making happen in the people who do it, right? The Martian is another version of the Robinson Crusoe story. We keep doing that one over and over and over. So what have I as a good narratologist? Jargon sign, please. Thank you. You know, trying to distill this again. I'd be really happy. I'm good at listening, I think, and talking with people about what they're trying to do and how to get there. That's probably what I'm good at, rather than providing real information of any kind. My advice, though, would be to say, you know, as you're thinking about all of this, work back from your desired effect. Where do you want people to be when they're actually done doing this particular game that you're designing? And who's the audience? You know, trying to design a game for everybody makes no sense, right? Trying to design games maybe for people that are already environmentalists in a certain different way makes no sense, right? Who are you trying to reach? What are you trying to do for those people? Inform them, educate them, energize them, convert them, entertain them to some extent, I hope. What's the emotion or set of emotions that you want to hit in them, right? Anger, maybe, fear, concern, anxiety, relief. think about, these are going to be short and simple games, okay? But one of the things that I really try to get my students to pay attention to is structure. Structure, right? Stories don't need to be linear. You all know that. I mean, this is the 21st century, and TV is filled with shows that use flashbacks and recursive structures in really, really sorts of effective ways, right? That's a way to open out different possibilities. Two more things. One, no story or storyline exists in isolation, right? People are going to be thinking about other stories while they're walking through and experiencing whatever story you're trying to give them. What stories do you want to evoke for those people, right? That go along with whatever story they're doing. And I do want to say that, you know, what you do, creating games like this seems to me really to matter a lot, professionally or in your own time. We need to draw from and use all the available media and forms if we're going to deal in even a minimally effective way with something like climate change. Bill McKibben was here, let's see, a week ago, and he was saying that, you know, what we need to do is find a way to get 10% of the people in American society to care about this. 10% to really care about it, and 50 to be coming along too, okay? Think about your audience.
Hi. I'm way less prepared than you, Gary. I don't have anything to say, really, other than just some thoughts that I've been having for a few years now. This is me, this is my contact info in case you need to reach me. I won't be here tomorrow, but I'm gonna be on Discord the whole day, and I will be here on Sunday. So if I end up, you know, if you have questions or whatever. And I only have 4 slides, but this is kind of wordy. So, I gave a talk here, actually in this room, a couple years ago. Sonia was there. I don't know if anyone, if the rest of you were there, but it was basically about what games are. And why games are great for learning. And this is going to be riffing off of a lot of what Teresa has already said. It's going to be riffing off of a lot of what the other mentors have already said, actually. To me, games are fundamentally 2 things. They're systems, you know, a series of interesting choices within systems, and they're stories. And you can think of all sorts of different types of examples of this. You know, Civilization is a total system sort of game, right? The Division that came out, it's a first-person shooter, third-person shooter. It's also a system. There's all these numbers involved. They all sort of interrelate to each other. To become an expert, and this is my field basically, is expertise in gaming. To become an expert in these systems, it means you need to explore them. You need to push at them. You need to tinker. You need to prod. You need to test the boundaries, basically. Figure out what the rules are and try to break them. Continuously try to break them. An expert gamer, I think, is somebody who is naturally somebody who just tries to break stuff within certain reasonable constraints, right? And then games are also stories. And the reason why I play games, until very recently, I was just talking to Daria about this, the reason why I play games is for the stories. I play mostly adventure games and RPGs. I'm really into figuring out how I can make meaningful choices to affect the story in a particular way to get like some, you know, envisioned version of the future that I want to have happen, right? And that's why I play these games. I think that the reason why that's so important for me is there's all this emotion involved, there's such satisfaction when you get the good ending. There's so much power given to players in affecting how the story's gonna go. So there's these 2 things. They basically equate also, so I don't think this is jargon, but with systems, in order to sort of understand systems and be able to affect change through systems, I call that agency. In order to be able to understand stories and basically affect change through stories, I call that empathy. So games to me are basically agency, giving people agency, and increasing empathy among people. and whatever they're experiencing. So that's sort of what this slide means. In the last couple of years, I've been super depressed, probably like a lot of you, due to certain things that have been happening around the world and with our country, and I've also been thinking a lot about absurdism. I talked about this last year also. I'm gonna just see what this is. So absurdism. I think we live in sort of absurdist times right now, and to me, when I think about games and how sort of what people have been trying to do with games, game simulations and games for learning for decades, since the 60s when people were playing war games in colleges and stuff. They've been trying to model real world systems so that people playing them could then understand these real world systems. So the paradox for me that I've been trying to wrestle with and getting my students to wrestle with me is what happens if the systems that we're trying to design, that we're trying to model our games off of in real life, are completely stupid, and why are we modeling them then? And so, what the hell does that mean? And is it possible then to create a game that models the stupid system where people realize it's a stupid system and they want to break out of it, and they want to figure out how to mess with it and break the rules and create a better world, right? And if you can do that through games, hopefully you can do that in your life. And then I just don't agree. I hate greed. I think it's the root cause of everything. We're so into capitalism. Uber just had an IPO, and you know, I'm tempted to buy some stock. I'm tempted to buy stock all the time. I never do it. There's this tension that I have between, do I live by my values and stay a hippie, or do I like actually eventually make a shit ton of money? You know, and I think we have to grapple with this in order to move forward. I think that's it. There's me. I used to work for OMSI down in Portland, so I've done a lot of science games. So if you want help with game design in general, okay.
Oh, yeah, I'll use the microphone. Why not? Thank you. So I'm Jennifer Atkinson. I am a senior lecturer at the University of Washington Bothell. And like Gary, I come from a background in English and literary studies. Everything he said about stories is true. So I'm just going to add a couple of points to that. We live our lives by stories. And storytelling is both a central part of our climate crisis and it's a potential solution to it. So it's part of the problem when our narratives promote stories of hyper-individualism, as we're just hearing from Mark, or when they dismiss collective action, reinforcing notions of that human concerns are somehow fundamentally separate from nature, or when we're defining our identities in terms of material wealth, accumulation, the myth of the American dream, right, that consumption is the path to fulfillment. But stories can also be part of the solution, especially when they help us imagine alternatives. And I think this is where games are such a powerful invitation for people to let go of the old, outdated stories and participate in new ones. So the thing to remember here is that we have to be able to see it before we can be it. So I'm gonna just put up two challenges. Challenge number one, how can we tell stories that help us move beyond individual action to embrace collective solutions? And this is an area where we're really stuck in an outdated story. So for decades, we've been fixated on individual consumer responsibilities. And we're so familiar with this, right? That the solution is about buying eco-friendly products or getting an electric car, eating less meat. These are all important. I encourage anybody who feels passionate about that to go ahead and do it, but it does not amount to coordinated political transformation. Climate change is an all-encompassing threat. It's going to require organization at every level, communities, states, nations, and international agreements to coordinate between them. So I just want to read a quick passage from David Wallace Wells, his op-ed recently from the New York Times. He wrote, "Conscious consumption is a cop-out. a diversion from collective action, which is what is necessary. The effects of individual lifestyle choices are ultimately trivial compared to what politics can achieve. And he gives a lot of very compelling examples, right? That buying an electric car is a drop in the bucket compared to drastically raising fuel efficiency standards. Flying less would be way easier if we actually had more high-speed rail and other alternatives. And he goes on and on. And to conclude the argument, he writes, that is what is meant when politics is called a moral multiplier. It is also an exit from the personal, emotional burden of climate change and what can feel like hypocrisy about living in a world as it is and simultaneously worrying about the future. We don't ask people who already pay taxes to support a social safety net to also demonstrate that commitment through individual philanthropic action. And similarly, we shouldn't ask anyone, and certainly not everyone, to manage his or her own carbon footprint before we even really try to enact laws and policies that would reduce all of our emissions. So that's challenge number one, thinking in terms of collective action. Number two, let's ditch that old story about sacrifice and deprivation, right? What we have to give up in order to have a greener future. What if we all tell stories about what we can gain, about the pleasures and opportunities of transitioning to a more just and sustainable society? So I'm going to show a really short film clip that does, I think, a very good job on both of these fronts. This is called A Message from the Future. It's narrated by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And the thought experiment here is, what if we actually pulled off the Green New Deal? What would that future look like? Do you want to go ahead and cue it up? So it's set a few decades from now, and what the team did is they really wanted to reject the prevailing narratives that A, it would be too disruptive to initiate change on this scale, and also disrupt the dystopian narrative that it's already too late. So here's the piece, and this is about 6.5, 7 minutes long, and this will be the closing piece, so if you have to pee really bad, you can run as soon as this is over, but you don't want to miss it.
Ah, the bullet train from New York to DC. It always brings me back to when I first started making this commute. In 2019, I was a freshman in the most diverse Congress in history. Up to that point, it was a critical time. I'll never forget the children in our community. They were so inspired to see this new class of politicians who reflected them navigating the halls of power. It's often said, you can't be what you can't see. And for the first time, they saw themselves. I think there was something similar with the Green New Deal. We knew that we needed to save the planet and that we had all the technology to do it, but people were scared. They said it was too big, too fast, not practical. I think that's because they just couldn't picture it yet. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with how we got here. 1977, New York. A senior scientist named James Black made a presentation about how burning fossil fuels could eventually lead to global temperatures rising 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Within 2 years, one of the world's biggest supertankers was outfitted with a state-of-the-art lab to measure CO2 in the ocean, gathering more data about global warming. Guess who was doing all of this research? ExxonMobil, the oil and gas company. Oh yeah, Exxon knew this whole time, as did our politicians. 10 years later, James Hansen, NASA's top climate scientist, told Congress he was 99% certain that global warming was happening and caused by humans. That was 1988, the year before I was even born. So did Exxon listen to the science, including their own? Did they change business models, invest in renewables? No, the opposite. They knew and they doubled down. They and others spent millions setting up a network of lobby groups and think tanks to create doubt and denial about climate change. It was an effort designed to attack and dispute the very kind of science they themselves had been doing. And it worked. Politicians went to bat for fossil fuels, and these massive corporations kept digging and mining, drilling and fracking like there was no tomorrow. America became the biggest producer and consumer of oil in the world. Fossil fuel companies made hundreds of billions, while the public paid the lion's share to clean up their disasters. We lost a generation of time we'll never get back. Entire species will never get back. Natural wonders gone forever. And in 2017, Hurricane Maria destroyed the place where my family was from, Puerto Rico. It was like a climate bomb. It took as many American lives as 9/11. And in the next year, when I was elected to Congress, the world's leading climate scientists declared another emergency. They told us that we had 12 years left to cut our emissions in half, or hundreds of millions of people would be more likely to face food and water shortages, poverty, and death. 12 years to change everything. How we got around, how we fed ourselves, how we made our stuff, how we lived and worked, everything. The only way to do it was to transform our economy, which we already knew was broken, since the vast majority of wealth was going to just a small handful of people, and most folks were falling further and further behind. It was a true turning point. Lots of people gave up. They said we were doomed. But some of us remembered that as a nation, we'd been in peril before. The Great Depression, World War II. We knew from our history how to pull together to overcome impossible odds. And at the very least, we owed it to our children to try. The wave began when Democrats took back the House in 2018, and then the Senate and the White House in 2020, and launched the decade of the Green New Deal, a flurry of legislation that kicked off our social and ecological transformation to save the planet. It was the kind of swing for the fence ambition we needed. Finally, we were entertaining solutions on the scale of the crises we faced without leaving anyone behind. That included Medicare for All, the most popular social program in American history. We also introduced the Federal Jobs Guarantee, a public option including dignified living wages for work. Funnily enough, the biggest problem in those early years was a labor shortage. We were building a national smart grid, retrofitting every building in America, putting trains like this one all across the country. We needed more workers. That group of kids from my neighborhood were right in the middle of it all, especially this one girl, Ileana. Her first job out of college was with AmeriCorps Climate, restoring wetlands and bayous in coastal Louisiana. Most of her friends were in her union, including some oil workers in transition. They took apart old pipelines and got to work planting mangroves with the same salary and benefits. Of course, when it came to healing the land, we had huge gaps in our knowledge. Luckily, indigenous communities offered generational expertise to help guide the way. Ileana got restless, tried her hand as a solar plant engineer for a while, but eventually made her career in raising the next generation as part of the Universal Child Care Initiative. As it turns out, caring for others is valuable, low-carbon work, and we started paying real money to folks like teachers, domestic workers, and home health aides. Those were years of massive change. And not all of it was good. When Hurricane Sheldon hit southern Florida, parts of Miami went underwater for the last time. But as we battled the floods, fires, and droughts, we knew how lucky we were to have started acting when we did. And we didn't just change the infrastructure, we changed how we did things. We became a society that was not only modern and wealthy, but dignified and humane too. By committing to universal rights like healthcare and meaningful work for all, we stopped being so scared of the future. We stopped being scared of each other, and we found our shared purpose. Ileana heard the call too, and in 2028, she ran for office in the first cycle of publicly funded election campaigns. And now she occupies the seat that I once held. I couldn't be more proud of her, a true child of the Green New Deal. When I think back to my first term in Congress, riding that old school Amtrak in 2019, all of this was still ahead of us. And the first big step was just closing our eyes and imagining it. We can be whatever we have the courage to see.
So, with all of those amazing kind of lightning talks in mind, what we are going to do coming up is form some teams and make some games around all of these different ideas. So I want to just put this slide up. This has just the names of the environmental researchers and kind of people who are talking on those themes, as well as some kind of bullet points about what the topic was. So take a moment and just remember back what they were talking about. And I'm going to tell you in a moment how we're going to go about forming teams and creating games around these different topics. Right before I do that, I just want to kind of put into some context what the end goal of all this is going to be, which is that we're going to think at the end of this, when you make a cool thing, we're thinking about a couple of different lenses about this, and this is what we're for judging, essentially. One of the things we're thinking about is how on theme are the games that you all are making. So did you capture the spirit of a mentor's research or a topic area, and were you inspired by it? Did it show off things? Did it really get the spirit of it? We're also going to be thinking about all the game things as well. So the technical expertise, the sound design, the art, the game design, and then you'll all have an opportunity to vote on each other's games as well. So the way that we're going to do idea formation is that we are going to go back over to Ackerly, and those research mentors, the ones who are talking about different environmental and storytelling-based topics, are going to be at different spots around the room. And what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to go find a mentor whose research really resonated with you, or the thing they were talking about resonated with you, and go talk to them about it. And go talk to the people who are talking to them about it. Circle around, talk to multiple people. If you see one person has a lot of people talking to them, find a different person. And then we are going to form teams with the people who the same topic resonated with them, right? So maybe you thought the food and agroeconomy talk was really fascinating. You want to go talk to other people who thought that was fascinating to see where your skills line up and start making a team that way. And then ultimately, you're going to be able to formulate ideas based on these groups. Some teams might just be everyone who's talking to that one person. There might be like, great, we've got 2 different ideas for a game, let's split off, let's make 2 different games based off the same research. But that's the general idea of how this is going to function next, back over in Ackerly. And at the end of this, those first 4 slide words are the same things that I said before. But then after that, we're going to be able to have everyone, or those kind of already formed teams, pitch their ideas. Partly as an opportunity for everyone who's already part of a team to be able to hear what everyone else is working on and get excited about what everyone else is working on. And partly because there might be some people who are thinking, wow, I had a really cool conversation, but I don't feel like I'm actually part of a team yet. And this is an opportunity to pick up those stragglers and make sure everyone has a project that they're excited to work on. Does that make sense with everyone? Awesome. So with that in mind, let us all head back. Oh, I see some hands.
So when we're picking topics, just everything that was discussed by different folks is kind of fair game to meld together into ideas. There's not like 3 topics that you're going to give us.
Exactly. So there might be like one person's thing who you're like, I'm going to say food and agroeconomy only because it's the one that I remember because I wrote it first, but I'm going to go back to this one. So you might be like, I really want to make a game about nature connectedness. I'm going to go talk to the nature connectedness person. But you might also be thinking, okay, I really want to make a game that's going to be both about food and agroeconomy and also collective solutions, because those were 2 things that really resonated with me. So essentially, these are the 6 different things that we're inspired by at the moment. But yes, it doesn't need to be like, and now here's the exact category of thing. Yes.
Yeah, are you going to put the slides up on Discord?
We will put the slides up in the Discord group.
So I want to point out that the research mentors are also going to be available during the weekend, either on Discord or physically available on site. So if you come back and say like, oh, there's this one part of the research or that their topic that I don't fully understand, and you want to kind of flesh it out with them, like they're available for that. So I just wanted to make that clear. That's why we're kind of doing it this way.
Great. So why don't we head on over to Ackerly? If you see people who have orange asking about the Game Jam buttons, we'll also be able to answer other questions about mentors and things like that too.